Good afternoon, and thank you for standing by. I'd like to inform all participants that your lines have been placed on a listen-only mode until the question and answer session of today's call. Today's call is also being recorded. If anyone has any objections, you may disconnect at this time. I would now like to turn the call over to Ms. Erlene Dowell. Thank you. You may begin.
Thank you, Erica. Good afternoon, and thank you to Lisa West from the U.S. Census Bureau for hosting this webinar. In light of the recent transition to 100% telework, we are utilizing technology off-site to continue operations. We aim to minimize interruptions as much as possible, but we appreciate your patience if we experience any technical delays. Please utilize the chat feature to notify us of issues should any arise, and we will do our best to address them. All webinars and Q&A sessions are recorded and will be accessible from the Census Academy's webinar tab once the recording and transcripts are available. Please go to www.census.gov/academy. And thank you for your continued support of our outreach and education efforts. On behalf of the U.S. Census Bureau, welcome to the 2017 Economic Census webinar series. Thank you for joining my colleague, Andy Haight, and myself this afternoon. My name is Erlene Dowell, and I'm a program analyst at the U.S. Census Bureau. Today's webinar will cover 2017 economic census data released for Arkansas, Florida, Georgia, Michigan, New Mexico, Oklahoma, and Texas. Here's the latest agenda of the 2017 Economic Webinar Series and what's to come. U.S. stats are from the First Look report. The grayed out rows shows the webinars that have already been conducted. These webinars are available at the Census Academy link at the bottom of the page. Also, just to let you know, we had to change our last webinar from August to September 3rd. So please make a note of that. We conduct more than 130 different monthly, quarterly, and annual census surveys every single year. Beginning with the decennial census, which is mandated by the Constitution and is conducted every 10 years to count every person living in the United States and the 5 U.S. territories. By now, many of you have probably received and filled out your 2020 census. If you have any questions, go to 2020census.gov. The next survey listed is the American Community Survey, or the ACS. The ACS took the place of the decennial census long form. This is an ongoing annual survey that gives detailed demographic, socioeconomic, and housing data. In addition to those demographic surveys, we also conduct a number of business programs. Every 5 years, Census conducts a census of governments, which identifies the scope and nature of the nation's state and local government sector. The census provides reliable benchmark figures of public finance and public employment, such as payroll, total employees, and finance of government. And finally, the economic census is conducted every 5 years and collects extensive statistics about business that is essential to understanding the American economy. The U.S. Census Bureau's mission is to serve as the leading provider of quality data on U.S. people and its economy. There are 58 different business surveys. This pyramid gives you a visual of the hierarchy of the different economic programs. At the top are our monthly and quarterly surveys. Every month we conduct 17 out of 22 economic indicator surveys. They include programs like the Monthly Retail Trade Survey, which provides monthly estimates on sales and inventories at retail or food services stores. These surveys are very timely but highly aggregated when it comes to the level of geography, which is only shown at the national level. Moving down the pyramid, we come to the annual survey, which include the popular survey like the annual survey of manufacturers and the annual retail trade survey, to name a couple. These annual surveys are more detailed than what are available in the monthly, quarterly surveys. They include information not only at the national level, but they even include data down to the state, metropolitan area, and even county level. Annual surveys tend to provide up-to-date trends to forecast future demands. At the base of the pyramid is the economic census that is conducted every 5 years on every employer business in the U.S. There are about 8 million employer businesses. The economic census is the most detailed and comprehensive economic program. It covers almost every 2 through 6 digit code covered by the Census Bureau. These codes are known as the North American Industry Classification System, or NAICS codes. A link of all full list of exclusions is provided. One exclusion is that we do not publish data for agriculture, which is published by the Department of Agriculture since 1997. The economic census also provides detailed geographic information at the national, state, metropolitan area, and even county levels. We are publishing place levels for some sectors, but there have been some adjustments, which we'll talk about later. The economic census also publishes other dimensions of data broken out by business size. There are 4 different dimensions that are available: employment size, revenue size, total number of establishments, and by company size. We also publish data by franchise or non-franchise owners. What makes the economic census so detailed is that it includes over 200 data variables, such as number of establishments, employment totals, or payroll. However, one of the unique data published by the economic census is revenue broken down below the national level. The economic census also publishes the product line data. Product lines are the detailed products and services provided by businesses and tailored to the individual industry. The economic census can be found on Census's new platform, data.census.gov, Census Business Builder, and other census tools. Finally, on this slide, the banner on the right includes an example of an Econ Census promotion advertisement and the tentative schedule of releases. This is the schedule of when 2017 Econ Census data releases are planned. The geographical area statistics data releases are expected by November 2020. The entire set of data will be completed by December 2021. In the red box is a link that takes you directly to this updated release schedule. The infographic on the right displays the states that have been released data for the 2017 economic census. By clicking on each individual state, you can get a better idea of which NAICS sectors have been released for that state. And it also includes a direct link to the data source. You can also sort the NAICS sectors at the top of the infographic to see what percentage of the sectors have been released thus far. The percentage marker on the bottom right will automatically refresh based on your selection. The infographic can be found in the link at the top in the red box. The states we are covering today were released on April 23rd. When we think about changes from the economic census, they can be grouped into 4 broad categories. The first are geographic areas. Compared to the 2012 economic census, the 2017 census no longer has zip code data, but there is still zip code data in the zip code business patterns. Also, there is no place data for manufacturing due to privacy rules. There were also changes in the NAICS codes that we will go over in a bit. As I mentioned earlier, regarding the product line data tables are now being replaced by the new North American Product Classification, or NAPS, system in the 2017 economic census. NAPS are product codes that census publishers as part of this economic census. Under this new classification system, products are now going to be published consistently across their different sectors. So what that will allow users to do, hopefully, is allow them to more easily combine products, data across industries. So for example, let's say you were interested in shoes and you wanted to get information on shoe manufacturers, shoe wholesalers, shoe stores, and shoe repair. Those would be 4 completely different industries that would have historically had 4 very different ways of publishing the product data for those 4 different industries. Under NAPS, now that shoe data will be more consistently displayed. Be sure to check out the link on the bottom of the slide to learn more. Other changes include new disclosure rules and, of course, the new data.census.gov dissemination platform. So let's go ahead and look at the changes for Arkansas. With one new micro area, or Hope, Arkansas, made up of Hempstead and Nevada counties, both which were not non-metro in 2012. There were 185 economic place changes, which included 93 places with area gain, and in the area gain we can see North Little Rock City. There were 82 places with area loss, including Pine Bluff City, one place with a name change, which was Bella Vista Town, which is now Bella Vista City, and 9 new places and 2 drop places. Be sure to check out the 2 links provided for more information. Geographical area changes for Florida are new Pensacola Ferry Pass, Florida, Alabama CSA, with 356 economic place changes. 191 places with area gain, including Daytona Beach City, 148 places with area loss, including Fort Myers, 1 place with a name change, Estero CDP, now Estero Village, 14 new places, and 10 drop places. For Georgia, we have 2 metro area changes. Macon-Bibb County Warner Robins CSA name changed, and new Eufaula, Alabama, Georgia micro area. There are 267 economic place changes, 140 places with area gain, including Atlanta City, 98 places with area loss, including Waycross City, 6 places with name change, 16 new places, and 4 drop places. Moving on to Michigan, there were no metro changes, but there were 551 economic place changes. There were 253 places with area gain, including Ann Arbor, 266 places with area loss, including Marquette City, 12 places with a name change, 20 new places, and 11 drop places. Next, we have information on New Mexico. New Rio Doso micro area with 104 economic place changes, 46 places with area gain, including Las Cruces, 53 places with area loss, including Rio Rancho City, 2 places with a name change, Rio Communities CDP, now Rio Communities City, and Kirtland CDP, now Kirtland City. There were 3 new places and 3 drop places. Join Andy tomorrow for a more comprehensive coverage on New Mexico as part of the New Mexico State Data Center Conference. Meanwhile, in Oklahoma, there were 2 metro changes. There was Dallas-Fort Worth, Texas, Oklahoma CSA added a new micro area, and Enid micro area, now a metro area. There are 115 economic place changes, which included 62 places with an area gain, including Tulsa City, 49 places with area loss, including Oklahoma City, 1 place with a name change, McLeod Town, now McLeod City, 3 new places, and 1 drop place. Finally, deep in the heart of Texas, Dallas-Fort Worth, Texas, Oklahoma CSA now includes a new micro area, Bonham. There are 694 economic place changes, 377 places with an area gain in Arlington City, 251 places with area loss in Dallas City, 7 places with a name change, 40 new places, and 6 drop places. As mentioned before, NAICS, or the North American Industry Classification System, is a system that we use to classify every single business in the United States. Census assigns the NAICS code to the business based upon their primary activity. The next 2 slides will highlight the changes in the 2017 Economic Census. NAICS was developed by OMB, or the Office of Management and Budget, Statistics Canada, and Mexico Stat Agency. This was done to ensure that there was comparability across the North American countries. NAICS was adopted in 1997 and is updated every 5 years. Types of changes include one-to-one recode, which means there are no changes but it has been recoded, many-to-one combos, which is 3 or 4 codes combined into one, many to many, and one to splitters, which has no changes in 2017, but there were a few in 2012. For example, in 2012, the electric power generation code was split into solar electric and solar farm. We'll cover these types of changes in the next slide, and note the color codes will mirror the upcoming tables. So let's go over a couple NAICS changes. Remember in the previous slide, salmon color equals name change or NAICS change, blue equals NAICS change only, and green equals merge NAICS change. So in mining, crude petroleum and natural gas extraction, 211111 has changed to crude petroleum extraction, 211120. Natural gas liquid extraction was changed to natural gas extraction. In manufacturing, pump and pumping equipment manufacturing and measuring and dispensing pump manufacturing has merged to become measuring, dispensing, and other pumping equipment manufacturing. In retail trade, warehouse clubs and supercenters has a NAICS code change of 4529110 to 452311, but now includes businesses with significant perishable goods sales that used to be classified in 452112. The name is the same, but content is not. Other changes included information, real estate and rental and leasing, and professional, scientific, and technical services. Under information in green, we see record production and integrated record production distribution is now changed to record production and distribution. The blue tables are cases where it's simply a recode, meaning the content of the industry has changed and all but the code that we classified it under has, such as formal wear and costume rental from 582220 to 532281 under real estate and rental and leasing. For professional, scientific, and technical services, this is the only sector that has had a truly brand new, never published before kind of code, and this is for research and development in nanotechnology. Again, this is important when you're using these data because you want to make sure you're pulling the data from the correct industry. So the primary place to access this data will be data.census.gov, but we also have Economic Census and Quick Facts on the Census homepage and in the Census Business Builder. With the 2017 Economic Census, we are also releasing some fun facts for social media and other platforms. These are fun facts that we released for Florida and New Mexico. Each one focuses on a NAICS sector of interest for that state and uses the 50-state quarter from the U.S. Mint. So with that, I will hand it over to Andy, and he'll finish off the webinar.
Great. Thank you so much, Earlene. So again, my name is Andy Haight. I am an economist at the U.S. Census Bureau. And today I'm going to continue what Earlene started on and talk a little bit more about the data that is available and was released from the Economic Census for these 7 states. I know that there's been a number of questions that have come up during the chat about some of those boundary changes that Earlene was just talking about. So let me just take a quick diversion and just provide a little bit more context to what Earlene was talking about. So boundary change can occur for a number of reasons and a number of ways. An incorporated city can annex some part of unincorporated area next to it. That city could de-annex some area, could sort of give land that used to be within the bounds of that city or town or village or borough to a neighboring city or town or village or borough. Those types of changes, of course, are legal changes to the boundaries of that geography. Often there are changes that are not legal changes. A simple movement of a river, you have a major flooding event and a river relocates itself. And now that river has moved where the river used to be, and that river was the boundary of that particular city or town. Well, now the boundary of that city or town has changed. At the Census Bureau, we do not retabulate prior year data to the new boundaries. But what we do that Erlene was talking about, is we provide reference materials to you to, number one, alert you to the fact that a boundary change has occurred. If I was comparing data for the town that I live in today to what the economic activity was in my town 10 years ago, if I did not take into account the boundary change that has actually occurred in the town that I live in, I might actually say, wow, look how much the economy of Crofton, Maryland has grown, when in fact some amount of that real economic growth isn't real. It's a figment of the boundary change. So we provide information, and again, Erlene talked about the resources that we have, those reference types lists that list all of those areas that have had area gain or area loss. We provide lists of them so you can be alerted to the fact that, yes, the boundary I care about has changed, or no, there hasn't been a boundary change, and therefore the data over time are comparable. I can now compare that data over time. We also then have a mapping resource, so you can actually see that boundary change. I could actually look on the map and I could see what the boundary of Crofton, Maryland was in 2012 and what the boundary of Crofton, Maryland is in the 2017 economic census, and I could see that now the current boundary, the 2017 vintage boundary of Crofton, now includes businesses and houses, by the way, that used to be outside of Crofton, Maryland. The key point I want to make here before I move on to the data is that these geographic changes are not only important when you're using data from the Census Bureau and you're comparing that data over time, but those boundary changes are important any time you're comparing data over time from any data provider. I can only think of 2 or 3 data providers that actually retabulate their data to the old and new basis, the new boundaries. Most data providers don't do that at all, and they are basically leaving it up to you to understand whether or not that geography that you care about has changed. Some people think that it's only small towns or small counties that have boundary change. That is not true at all. As Erlene was walking through the comparison, she pointed out a couple of really large cities in the states that we were just talking about that have had a boundary change. The city of Chicago had a boundary change. Now, whether that change is significant, whether the economy of Chicago really has changed significantly because of the boundary change, you're the one who can make that decision, but we try to provide the raw materials to you to help you decide, yes, I know that boundary changed, but I know that there are only 3 businesses in that area that now is included in my town that wasn't there before. So you know what? I'll call it comparable. It doesn't need to be perfect for my purposes. Whereas another boundary change, you might say, oh my gosh, that boundary change, that annexation that has occurred actually has now really changed the boundaries, the geography, the data for my area. And no, I can't compare that data because it's really not comparable. So we provide those materials for you. So thank you all for asking those questions in the chat. So what I'd like to now do is provide a little bit of facts, some real numbers from the 2017 economic census to talk about some of the key findings that we have found. Now, as Erlene pointed out, the data that we publish in the economic census are published not only at the state level, but also at the metropolitan area, county, place, what we call city, town, village, and borough, and even in some of our programs down to zip code. The Econ Census is just down to place. The data are not only shown at the 2-digit NAICS sectors, so like the sectors you're seeing on the slides right now, mining, utilities, construction, manufacturing, these broad categories, but the data are also provided at the 3, 4, 5, and 6-digit NAICS code levels. So what I would encourage you all to do as I walk through these slides is I would encourage you to further explore this data to understand what is it about the wholesale sector in Arkansas that makes it the largest sector in terms of revenue for the entire state. You can see that of all of the published sectors that we have published data for the state of Arkansas, the largest one by quite a bit is the wholesale trade sector with about $74.6 billion in revenue during 2017. The second ranked one was retail trade. Third ranked one was the healthcare and social assistance sector. And as we walk through these slides, you'll see that sometimes we see the same patterns from state to state. Wholesale trade tends to be the largest sector in most states, but you'll definitely see that that may not be true in other states. Now, on the right-hand side, we're looking at the change in revenue by sector at the state level from 2012 to 2017. And you can see that not only is the wholesale trade sector the largest sector in Arkansas in 2017, it has also had the largest increase since 2012. Wholesale trade rose by nearly $13 billion in that 5-year period. So that sector really is booming. The second ranked sector is the healthcare sector. That's a very common situation in the U.S. Healthcare has been growing in the United States economy for at least the last 20 or 30 years. In some states and in some areas, the healthcare sector is the largest employer in that particular sector. But here in Arkansas, you can see that the wholesale trade sector has grown the most. Now, you'll notice that there's a couple of sectors that there is no bar shown. The mining, construction, and manufacturing sectors don't have any data yet published. Those statistics will be published on or around August 27th, which is actually why we pushed off the release of the very last webinar about the manufacturing, mining, and construction sector to September 3rd. Arlene mentioned that in her second slide. You'll notice that one sector, educational services, is so tiny it didn't even make the cut for this report. One of the things that Arlene mentioned was that we exclude some activities from the economic census because they're covered by other sectors or other programs. That is true for educational services. We do not publish data on primary and secondary education, which includes colleges and universities, because the National Center for Education Statistics publishes data on that sector. We don't want to burden those colleges and universities with having to fill out 2 census forms, one from us and one from NCES, so instead we just simply exclude that data. That is also true for agriculture. We used to actually conduct the agriculture census through the 1997 Economic Census. We conducted a census of agriculture at the Census Bureau, but in 1997 we realized that USDA, National Agricultural Statistics Service, is specifically there to collect information and publish data on farms, on the agriculture sector. So in 1997, we actually moved the agriculture census from the Census Bureau out to USDA. In most of our data products at the Census Bureau, agriculture is going to be excluded from the table, but we do have some data tools like Census Business Builder that merge together the ag data from USDA with the non-agriculture data that we have for the other 18 sectors in the economic census. Now, you'll also notice that there are 3 sectors here that are marked with an NA in the actual table: utilities, information, and finance and insurance. These 3 sectors, we do not publish state-level data at the sector-level total because aggregating data at the state level across all of the industries that comprise that sector would end up with a number that essentially means nothing. However, we do have data at the state, metro, and county level for those sectors for specific industries. So, for example, let's say I was interested in banking in the state of Maryland, or in this case, the state of Arkansas. We would have data on that specific NAICS industry, even though we don't publish data for the financial insurance sector as a whole. So, again, a quick look at some basic data for Arkansas. What I would encourage you all to do, those of you certainly from Arkansas, is to go in and actually see what industries within wholesale trade comprise this biggest chunk of these sales? Are there specific industries within wholesale trade that make up that huge increase, that $12.9 billion increase between 2012 and 2017? Or is that increase in wholesale activity consistent across all of the industries in the wholesale sector? Are there certain counties where wholesale trade has really boomed in Arkansas, or is that growth in the wholesale trade sector across the entire state consistent, across the whole state? So let's look at the data for Florida. We see a similar pattern, again, of the wholesale trade sector being the top sector. But looking at the change over time, we noticed that actually the retail trade sector had a larger increase in revenue between 2012 and 2017. Now, I am a bit of a data nerd and curious by nature. So I was curious to see what industries within retail trade have seen the largest portion of that increase. Is retail trade growing in the state of Florida across all retail industries, or is it concentrated in some? And what I found is something that many of you might not be surprised to hear, but was actually sort of interesting to see how much of that growth it really has, and that is in non-store retailers, or what we typically think of as consumers as online shopping. That particular industry in the state of Florida saw the largest growth in the retail trade sector in comparison to other sectors. Now, looking at the other changes, we see that admin and support and waste management and remediation service actually had the third largest increase in this particular state. Now, this industry or this sector includes a wide variety of very different businesses, but one type of industry, one industry that is included in this particular NAICS sector is employee leasing companies, or what we call professional employer organizations, PEOs. PEOs have boomed in the state of Florida, and these businesses that have workers that they then place in a leased employment situation all across the United States, most of their revenue that they're generating is actually counted by the PEO that's based in the state of Florida. So it's a really interesting sector. This is one of the few states where admin and support and waste management and remediation was actually seeing this kind of an increase. Now, looking at the state of Georgia, we see sort of a similar pattern as we saw in Arkansas. Wholesale trade is the largest sector, and wholesale trade also was the sector that had the largest increase between 2012 and 2017. Again, I would encourage you all to check out, is this big increase in wholesale trade happening across all the industries within this particular sector? And is it happening across all counties in Georgia? Or is it really concentrated in certain counties, let's say Fulton County, Georgia, where Atlanta is located? Looking at the state of Michigan, we see that wholesale trade, again, is the largest sector, and that sector also had the largest increase. However, I would state to everybody and remind everybody that we have not yet published the data in this chart for mining, construction, and manufacturing. So whether wholesale trade actually is the largest sector and has seen the largest growth between 2012 and 2017, or whether it has not, and whether manufacturing is actually the largest sector, that we will see when that data finally gets released. Now, you'll notice over on the right-hand side, there actually is one sector that is down between 2012 and 2017, and that is the management of companies and enterprises sector. Management of companies and enterprises, or NAICS 55, is the sector that we use to classify company headquarters and other sort of corporate offices, payroll centers, divisional headquarters, things like that. Businesses where you have workers working in that headquarters but are not actually engaged in retailing or wholesaling or manufacturing or many of the other industries those businesses are located in. So management of companies and enterprises, that is the NAICS code that we use to capture those workers that work at company headquarters. And it's an important sector for us to collect data for because it allows us to separate those non-producing, and that's maybe a little bit unfair saying that, non-producing workers from the workers that work in other businesses like their manufacturing activities or like their wholesale operations or like their transportation operations, et cetera. Now, I did just see a quick chat note that came up. Someone asked a question about the admin and support sector. Does that include temporary agencies and employee type of employer agencies? Yes, it does. And again, that's something that you would see if you looked at the data for Florida. Florida, however, is not the only state that has PEOs, these professional employer organizations. Looking at the data for New Mexico, you'll notice that the picture is a little different. Retail trade is actually the largest sector in New Mexico, slightly larger than the wholesale trade sector. But when you look at the sector that has seen the most growth in the state of New Mexico from 2012 to 2017, you actually see that it's a sector we haven't yet talked about, and that is professional, scientific, and technical services. These are engineering firms. These are consulting businesses. These are lawyers. Those types of businesses are all counted in the professional, scientific, and technical services. And those of you who are familiar with the state of New Mexico know that there are a number of very large tech companies that are based in New Mexico, and you can see how much their economy has really, how much their growth has affected the overall economy of the state. The second largest sector was one that we've already talked about, healthcare and social assistance. But I will say I was quite fascinated and maybe even a little alarmed to see this large $1 billion decline in the wholesale trade sector between 2012 and 2017. Erlene mentioned to you all that I will actually be presenting information at the New Mexico State Data Center annual conference tomorrow. And in that conference tomorrow, I will be talking some more about providing some more detail than what we're seeing here about what's going on in the economy in New Mexico in this 5-year period. It is quite interesting to see what's going on with wholesale, why we see that big decrease. So turning our focus to Oklahoma, we again see that the wholesale trade sector is the largest. Second largest is retail trade. But once again, we see another really fascinating decline in the wholesale trade sector in the state of Oklahoma. In that 5-year period, total sales of wholesale trade businesses went from about $100 billion to $66.9, almost $67 billion, a $35.9 or almost $36 billion decline. Now, when I was talking before about encouraging you all to further explore where these changes are occurring, what sectors they're occurring in, what industries within the sectors are they occurring, geographically, where are these changes occurring, this is certainly something I was really curious about when I was looking at the data for Oklahoma. I'm not going to be a spoiler here, so I want to encourage you all to check this out. But what you often see in changes in the economy in certain states and certain sectors, sometimes those changes are due to general growth or general decline across all businesses in that sector in that state. When you think about the increase in retail sales, a lot of the increase we see in retail sales across the country comparing 2012 to 2017 is due to price change. When the price of gasoline increased from 2012 to 2017, some of that growth is reflected then in the sales number. And since we don't adjust our sales data for inflation, a lot of the increase is due to price change. But other times, these declines, these changes, these big increases or big decreases can often be attributed to a relatively small number of businesses or companies that have entered a market or have left a market. So I would, again, encourage you guys to check this out for the state of Oklahoma. Now, our last Texas, the great state of Texas, again, a very similar pattern as what we saw for some of the other sectors. Wholesale trade is the largest sector with over $1 trillion in sales in the wholesale trade sector in Texas. The second largest sector by quite a bit is retail trade. However, as I mentioned before, we haven't yet published the data for mining, construction, and manufacturing. And I know that manufacturing in this 5-year period also really boomed. So I'm really curious to see how wholesale compares to manufacturing in Texas in this 5-year period. Looking at the change between 2012 and 2017, you can see that wholesale trade again had the largest largest increase of about $77.4 billion. But close behind it was actually the retail trade sector. Right behind there was the healthcare sector, and then you can see the other sectors there as well. So again, this has just been a very brief walkthrough of some of the selected data we have at the sector level by state. I very much would encourage you all to further explore these data in our new data.census.gov platform, where you can go in and understand how are these changes in Texas occurring over this period. Is this growth uniform across the state, or is it concentrated in certain counties in the state of Texas? Okay, so with that, let's just close out the webinar today with some conversations about what's coming up next. Erlene mentioned that we will be completing these local area releases by November. It actually will be more like the end of August. So what comes up after this? So Erlene mentioned these product lines data, this really rich breakout of the detailed products and services that the data of products and services provided by businesses in a particular industry. In the past, we used to publish data on product lines in 3 very different ways of looking at products data. For the mining and manufacturing sectors, we published product data one way. For the construction sector, we published it a second way. And for all other sectors of the U.S. economy, we published it a third way. So if you were interested in looking at a product across multiple sectors, Erlene brought up the example of shoes, shoe manufacturers, shoe retailers, shoe repair. You used to have to wade through 3 very different ways of accessing that data to pull that data together. In the new way of releasing data following the North American Product Classification System, or NAPS codes, all of the product data will be consolidated together in one large consolidated file. And I'm really happy that we're doing that. The NAPS data will start coming out in November of this year. Now, Erlene also talked about these really rich size data that we have that are released in something called the Establishment and Firm Size Reports. These will come out from November of this year through September of September of next year. And the big change here is that we have substantially consolidated these size tables that make it easier now for people to pull together data by business size. So for example, let's say I wanted to understand the importance of small business in my state. And my definition of small are establishments with fewer than 5 employees. There is now a single table that has establishment size data broken out by employment size, where before we had that establishment by employment size table in 20 different tables, actually 18 different tables, one separate table for each sector of the economy. Now those tables are all going to be consolidated together. So now I can pull out business size data across multiple sectors of the economy from one place. I'm really happy we have done this. This will certainly make it easier to access this data in the new data.census.gov platform. And then finally, at the end of the entire economic census, we released something called the miscellaneous subjects tables. This is a fascinating pile of really sort of interesting tables. For example, if you were ever interested in looking at the sales of gas stations, broken out by how many pumps they have, to identify how many gas stations only have a single pump and what are their sales versus what are the gas stations that have 40 pumps or 30 pumps. Those size breakouts of gas stations by number of pumps is one of the tables we actually published in the miscellaneous subjects series. So I would, again, encourage you guys to check these out. We will be doing a separate presentation, a webinar, on these upcoming data products, and in there we'll be giving you some more information about the tables that we are publishing for 2017 as opposed to those tables that we dropped. There are a couple of brand new tables. For example, if you wanted to get information about electronic ordering in restaurants, the fact that I can now walk into a restaurant and actually have a keypad at my table where I can place my order without even having to talk to a wait staff person, that type of data will now be available in the miscellaneous subject reports. So to summarize, the Economic Census provides an amazing wealth of business data. I've worked at the Census Bureau for almost 33 years now, and I'm still fascinated by the unbelievable detailed information that are available from the Economic Census. Because it's so comprehensive, it takes us a long time to get the data released. The data are released on a flow basis. We'll be completing our local area data in August of this year, and again, we have these extra programs series that are coming out after there. Again, I'd encourage you guys to check out our releases schedule to be able to find that information. Geographies constantly change, and I'm going to harp on it one more time. Anytime you're making comparisons of business data over time, and I'd even say demographic data, you always have to make sure that the thing that you are comparing is comparable. So that comparability can not only be geography, but it can be industry coverage. I just saw someone ask the question about when are we publishing data on nanobiotechnology. We already have. We started publishing that data already. The complete data will now be available. That industry has grown enough that now it warranted having its own NAICS code. So you'll see that data for the very first time. For the 2012 Economic Census, for example, we created brand new NAICS codes for solar, wind, geothermal, and biomass electric power generation. So if you want to know how much solar electricity is generated in the state of California each year or in Arizona, that data is available. So again, NAICS change, geography change, very important to know. As Erlene mentioned, we are releasing all of our Economic Census data on the new data.census.gov platform. I know many of you are probably bemoaning the loss of American Fact Finder, but I will promise you that this will all be worth it. Data.census.gov promises to provide a lot more functionality that you could never do in the old American Fact Finder application. So that information is now going to be available eventually, the way to manipulate those tables in the new data.census.gov. So I want to say thank you to everybody for taking the time out of your busy days today to listen to us present, my colleague Arlene and I present about this data. Operator, let's go ahead and see if we have any questions over the phone. I have seen a whole bunch of chat questions coming in while I was speaking, so maybe we'll take a couple of those chat questions while we're queuing up people for the phone.
Thank you. To ask a question, please press, sorry.
No, you go.
To ask a question, please press star followed by 1. Please ensure that your phone is unmuted and record your name clearly when prompted. And to withdraw your request, please press star 2.
Sorry about that, Erica. Andy, one of the questions that came in, or more of a statement from Susan, was that it's not an annual conference, but an additional WebEx training.
Very good. Thank you, Susan, for clarifying.
Yes. And then here are some of the questions. The mapping application on data.census.gov does not seem to work for economic census data published at the state level. Do you have a timeline on what that mapping application will be functional? Also, in the same question, American Fact Finder had the functionality of downloading shapefiles. Does data.census.gov have something comparable?
So let me pick on the first question first. The mapping functionality in data.census.gov is a work in progress. The economic geographies that we publish are unique in some cases. I'm actually a little bit surprised to hear this user say that they were having problems doing the mapping at the state level because we haven't created any new states in the United States in a while. I definitely will tell you mapping data at the place level, cities, towns, villages, boroughs, that is very different on the economic side than it is on the demographic side. But I can definitely check into that. My email address and phone number are here on the slide. Please go ahead and send me a little more detailed information about the issues you're having with the mapping functionality, and I can actually research that for you further. The second part of that question was about shapefiles. Right now, the download options that are available in data.census.gov do not include the ability to download shapefiles, but I do know that they are working on that functionality, on adding that ability to the functionality of the application. There are, however, I will say, other Census Bureau data tools that do allow you to download shapefiles. One of them is the Census Business Builder application. We actually added that functionality last year, and I know that Erlene can also tell you that the ability to download shapefiles are available from some of the local employment dynamics, longitudinal employer household dynamics data products. So yes, we do have that ability. Of course, shapefiles can be downloaded from our Tiger Web services as well. But yes, that functionality is being added to data.census.gov.
And Andy, same attendee, one more question. I think Andy just said data for 6-digit NAICS is actually not available at the state level. Just clarifying.
So the level of NAICS detail that is published by geography varies widely from industry to industry. And the biggest way I can explain, the easiest way I can explain why it varies is the number of businesses in that industry. When you think about an industry like restaurants, there are hundreds of thousands of restaurants in the United States. So our ability to publish data for specific geographies, like right down to cities and towns, and specific 6-digit NAICS codes within that restaurant sort of sector is easy. We have plenty of businesses to be able to tabulate, and there's very little issue with suppression of data because there's so many businesses. Even in some of the smallest towns, you at least have a couple of restaurants there that would allow us to continue publishing the data and not violate the privacy of those businesses. In other sectors of the U.S. economy, that is not true at all. For example, in the mining sector, there are only 38,000 mining facilities in the entire United States. So breaking out that data by industry and by geography gets really challenging really quick, because quickly you can end up identifying a single business in a particular state, in a particular industry. So in that case, we actually very often only show the 2, 3, and 4-digit NAICS data, but not provide the more detailed 5- and 6-digit codes, again, because of privacy. We are bound by Title 13 of the U.S. Code to protect the privacy of businesses who respond to our programs. So if Erlene and I owned the only 2 gas stations in our little town, Census couldn't publish the data because she could easily subtract her employment and her payroll and her revenue for her business from the total and know exactly what a cheapskate I am in terms of how much I pay my employees. So we definitely take that privacy protection very seriously, and it has a big impact on the data that we can publish. Operator, do we have any questions on the phone yet?
Hello?
Hello?
I have a question. When will we actually be starting to work?
So will the what again?
When will we actually be doing work? Like, when will we actually be? I'm in the field operations, so this is my first time. I'm trying to figure out how to do everything. So, like, when will we actually start working?
So you are a newly hired employee who's working on 2020. Yeah. So For today's webinar, we're really focusing on the Econ Census data. I actually don't know exactly what the situation
What the government has planned.
Yeah, I know it's still a work in progress of when we're actually going to get enumerators out on the street. Obviously, from a state-by-state basis, those rules.
Yeah, this is Arkansas. It's not very big, and it sucks here. Just saying.
Yeah, it's a very challenging situation that we are all in. So yeah, unfortunately, I don't have a good answer for you. So
it's okay. I appreciate you for trying to answer it.
No problem.
Questions on the phone at this time?
Great, Andy, I have a list. Yes.
Sure,
All right,
okay.
So another question is, I know that this data is collected every 5 years, but I was wondering if there are any more recent economic data that you collect.
Yes. So absolutely. So as Erlene mentioned when she was starting off the presentation, she talked about that. She showed you all that pyramid with the monthly and quarterly surveys at the top, the annual programs in the middle, and the economic census at the bottom. So certainly we have more timely data than the economic census. I was just doing a presentation yesterday where we were talking with the user about the monthly retail trade data that we published just recently for the month of May and June. When you look at that data, the impact of COVID is about as much a slap in the face as you can imagine. There's a huge decline in retail sales due to COVID-19. So certainly we have more timely data. The challenge, though, is the level of detail that is shown. As Erlene mentioned, those really, really timely monthly and quarterly surveys are really valuable because they give us a reality check on what's happening in our economy last month. But those data are only shown for limited industries, limited industry levels. There's very few data variables shown in that thing. For example, the monthly retail sales number literally has one statistic, retail sales. There's no business counts, there's no employment, there's no payroll. It's just establishment, it's just sales. And it's pretty limited in terms of geography. Erlene mentioned that with only 2 exceptions, those monthly and quarterly surveys are only shown at the national level. So yeah, you've got more timely data, but it's not going to give you the level of geographic detail. The annual programs give you a little bit more detail, more geography, more industry detail, but nothing, honestly, is as detailed as the economic census is. Now, I will tell you that in working with users, I often refer people to other data providers that have detailed information. The Bureau of Labor Statistics conducts a program called the Quarterly Census of Employment and Wages, the QCEW. And as you can imagine, it's a quarterly survey. So they have data through the first quarter of 2020. And they're probably getting close to having second quarter 2020 data coming out in the next couple of weeks or months or so. It's very timely data. It's down to the county level, so it's pretty detailed in terms of that. But the QCEW only publishes data on establishments, employment, and payroll, period. There's no revenue data in the QCEW. So if your measure of economic growth in your community is revenue, then you really do need to look at the economic census. What I tell users often is use the economic census to understand these historical trends and then essentially project the economic census data forward using the monthly and quarterly and annual programs as an approximation. Now, you have to make some leaps of faith when you do that, of saying that the growth across my state or across all counties in my state is consistent. And of course, that's, as an economist, that makes me cringe a little bit. But people often want to be able to do that. But yeah, the Econ Census is around because it's the most comprehensive thing that we do.
Andy, is the smallest geographic area city or county?
So in the economic census, the most detailed geography that we publish is city, town, village, and borough, or what we call a place. And that includes both incorporated places like cities, but it also includes unincorporated areas, or what the Census Bureau calls census-designated place. For example, where I live in Maryland, it's a CDP. It's not an incorporated city. There's actually only one incorporated city in my entire county. That is the city of Annapolis. So place is the smallest geography we go down to in the economic census. The Zip Code Business Patterns Program does publish establishment counts by employment size by zip code, and that is as far down as we go in our economic programs at the Census Bureau. We don't go below zip code. We don't, for example, produce data at the census tract or at the block group, or certainly at the block level, because again, it would be so easy to have to suppress pretty much everything because there'd be so few businesses in a particular industry in a particular census tract.
All right, Andy, the creative class is doing great in New Mexico. Is that reflected in the relative outcomes in view of coronavirus epidemic? Richard Florida himself is a bicyclist and writes about obesity back in 2008, 2009 with swine flu. Obesity was a factor, and it is now as well. How do we find, so I guess that's one question or one statement.
Okay, so the first part about the creative sector in New Mexico, a lot of the types of businesses that we would typically think of as creative would be classified in the arts, entertainment, and recreation sector, and we could certainly look at how that sector has changed in the state of New Mexico. The more recent data that we have would show how that sector is being impacted. Arts, entertainment, and recreation, actually, when you look at some of our very timely small business pulse survey data that have just come out recently on COVID-19 impacts, as well as the business formation statistics data, you would see that that sector is really getting hammered nationwide and certainly by state. It's not seeing the impact that the accommodation and food services sector, of course, makes 72 is being impacted. That's restaurants and hotels that have, 60%, 70% of these businesses have had to shut down because of COVID-19. The arts and entertainment recreation sector is not being affected as much as that sector is, but it definitely is being impacted. Whether those businesses come back, we will see. The data hopefully will show that they are recovering. Was there another question, Earlene, too?
Yes, I have. No, there's just more. How do we find what areas within the border categories, i.e. wholesale trade, are impacted and to what extent, and where within the location?
So I guess this person is sort of taking to heart what I was saying when we were walking through the state-level data in those charts. The data I was shown at a very aggregated geographic level by state, and they were shown at a very aggregated level by industry at the two-digit NAICS sector. But in the data.census.gov platform, I could not only look at wholesale trade as a whole, but I could then go in and drill down and look at the wholesale trade sector by 3-digit or 4-digit or 5- and 6-digit NAICS code, so the more detailed industry breakouts. And that would help me then understand this big increase we're seeing in wholesale trade in a particular state is concentrated in a particular industry, or maybe conversely, that growth is happening across the entire sector. For example, a little preview of the New Mexico data that I'm going to be talking about tomorrow. When we look at the wholesale trade growth in New Mexico, the piece of wholesale trade that has grown the most is for motor vehicle and parts wholesalers. So that particular 3-digit NAICS code has seen a substantial portion, more than half of the growth in the state of New Mexico has happened in that particular industry within the broader wholesale trade sector. Then, of course, you could then similarly drill down from the state down to metros and counties within the state. You could say, okay, within the wholesale trade sector, I can tell that the motor vehicle and parts wholesalers are growing. Is that growth primarily concentrated in one or two counties, let's say Bernalillo County in New Mexico, or is that growth happening across the state of New Mexico? Are multiple counties growing in that? So it really helps when you drill down to that more detailed data. You help to understand whether that growth that is occurring is concentrated in a relatively small number of industries and geographies, and therefore that's a very sort of concentrated growth, or whether that growth is more sort of holistic across all of the different industries and geographies within that state. So yeah, that's the kind of thing I would encourage people to do using the data.census.gov platform.
Would charging stations for electric vehicles be included under the solar NAICS code?
So, short answer, no. The data for the utilities sector, which would include that industry for solar, geothermal, wind, and biomass electric power generation, that utility sector is primarily covers businesses that generate electricity or steam or other forms of other utilities and distribute them. A electric charging station is actually classified with either the retail. In the retail sector, it's classified under that activity, or it's classified under the NAICS code, where auto repair and other kinds of businesses like that are classified. Right now, there is not, to the best of my knowledge, a specific NAICS code for electric charging stations, because very often that service is provided by a business that has other services. For example, the gas station that I frequent here in town has 4 charging stations that are right there at that particular branded gas station. And it's just a service that the gas station provides to customers who come in to fill up their car with gasoline or diesel, but also to service people who have Teslas and other vehicles that they need to plug in. So that service is provided, and again, it doesn't have its own NAICS code.
Are tribal nation jurisdictions reported as geographic areas within the data?
So it's a complicated question, and the short answer is, in our economic programs at the Census Bureau, businesses that are located on tribal lands, and whether those businesses are tribal-owned businesses or non-tribal-owned businesses, those businesses are tabulated in the quote-unquote regular geography that they are located in. So if that business is located in a particular county or a particular place, a city, town, village, or borough, they are tabulated in that regular quote-unquote standard geography. In our economic programs area, we currently do not publish data by tribal geography. So I know that has been an ongoing discussion with a lot of users, certainly in New Mexico, but in many other states as well, asking when are we going to ever publish business data by tribal geography. I understand there are discussions to potentially do that for the 2022 Economic Census. The discussions when they came up for 2017, given a lot of the other problems that we were having with funding and a major government shutdown, those discussions were tabled for 2017, but it's a possibility. There are some users who are doing custom tabulations using the microdata, the PUMS type files, to create summaries of businesses by tribal areas. And there are a few other federal agencies like BLS that publishes data by tribal geography, but we don't, unfortunately, at the Census Bureau. Sorry.
And Andy, here's the final question. It's almost 3:15. What adjustments will be made for 2020 to account for COVID? What adjustments do you foresee for 2020 to account for COVID? Oh, it's twice, I'm sorry. Have you thought about this yet, and how will it be identified in data sets?
So if we're talking about the business data that we will be publishing for the 2020 timeframe, certainly when you think about our monthly and quarterly surveys that are already collecting data for calendar year and months during 2020, we are already seeing impacts to our business collection processes, how we collect data from business for businesses that are being impacted by COVID-19. For a long time, our call center was not in operation at the Census Bureau, so if a business did not respond to their electronic data collection or their paper forms that we sent them, we didn't have staff to call them to say, hey, Earlene, you didn't fill out your form for your business. I need the data. So we definitely have seen some impacts of our ability to reach businesses that might not be open during this, and it has made our collection efforts a little bit more challenging. That is certainly true, or certainly more true in some industries than it is in others. In manufacturing, we probably haven't seen nearly the impact on response rates and things like that to our business data that we would see in like the accommodation food services sector, because again, the types of businesses that we're collecting from, those headquarters employees of a big manufacturer, they probably were still working. Now, they may not have been working in their office, like Earlene and I haven't been back in our office for 4 months, but they were still working, and those workers probably were still able to complete their census forms because they were still actually working. But yeah, it's going to be a very interesting time period. I will say just in closing that I would encourage you all to check out these 3 new programs that were created specifically to measure the impact of COVID-19. There are 2 pulse surveys. There's something called the Small Business Pulse Survey, and it's a household pulse survey that collect information on how COVID-19 has been affecting small businesses and how it's been affecting households. And we also have a survey called, or program called Business Formation Statistics that was updated to produce weekly estimates of new business formations. So not only have existing businesses been being affected by COVID-19, but so have startups. A lot of businesses that might have started up during this time frame have put their startup plans on hold because there's no sense trying to open when they can't even meet the needs of their potential customers under this current environment. So we're seeing those, and we also have a 4th survey called the Community Resilience Estimates that, again, helps identify communities that are particularly vulnerable to shocks. Not only shocks like COVID-19, but even things like hurricanes and floods and other fires and things like that. So I would definitely encourage you all to check out those new programs. If you go to census.gov and just search for them in the search box, you'll come right to them. So thank you so much, Earlene, for pulling together all those questions. Operator, do we have any other questions that might have come in on the phone?
No questions on the phone at this time. And as a reminder, to ask a question, please press star followed by 1.
Great. Okay. Well, again, thank you all so much for taking time out of your busy schedules. Sorry for running about 20 minutes later than we originally had planned for today, but lots of great questions. I'm really happy we had good attendance today. So have a wonderful day.
This does conclude today's conference. You may disconnect at this time.